Victoria Hospital's nurse who never leaves her shift. It was the summer of 1953, and an oppressive heat wave had settled over Renfrew like a suffocating blanket, draining the town of its usual vigor. The air was thick with humidity, and even the trees seemed to wilt under the sun's relentless gaze. The normally bustling streets were unusually quiet, as if the town itself had surrendered to the stifling heat. Inside Renfrew's Victoria Hospital, the situation wasn't much better. The old brick building, with its creaking floors and narrow hallways, had become a furnace despite the whirring fans stationed in every corner. They hummed and rattled, but their feeble breeze did little to alleviate the discomfort. Emily, a 34-year-old factory worker, lay in her bed in Ward 2, recovering from an emergency appendectomy. Her dark hair clung to her forehead in damp strands, and beads of sweat glistened on her pale skin. The white hospital sheets, already sticking to her, were no comfort against the suffocating heat. She stared out the window, watching as the sun dipped lazily below the horizon, casting long shadows across the hospital grounds. It was late afternoon, and yet the heat showed no sign of easing. Her body was weak from the surgery, but her mind buzzed with restlessness. She pressed the call button for a nurse, her throat parched and her lips dry. The cool water she'd been sipping earlier now seemed like a distant memory, her glass empty on the table beside her. The moments stretched on longer than usual, the hospital unusually quiet, as if the heat had driven everyone into a languid daze. Just as she was about to press the button again, Emily saw movement out of the corner of her eye. A woman in a nurse's uniform passed by the open door of her room, moving with an air of calm purpose. Relief washed over Emily, and she called out, "Excuse me, nurse? Could I have some water, please?" The nurse didn't stop. She continued walking down the dimly lit hallway, her footsteps soft but deliberate. Emily frowned, confusion and irritation bubbling within her. The nurse's uniform looked odd, dated, almost like it belonged in another era. The fabric was stiff and starched, the skirt falling well below the knee, a style Emily hadn't seen in years. And the hat, so peculiar, perched high on her head in an old-fashioned style that seemed out of place in the modern ward. "Nurse!" Emily called out again, more urgently this time, her voice echoing down the empty hall. She struggled to sit up, her muscles protesting from the effort, but her curiosity was stronger than the pain. Her eyes followed the nurse's retreating form, and just as she was about to call out once more, something impossible happened. The nurse, without so much as a pause, walked straight through the solid wall at the end of the corridor. Emily's breath caught in her throat. There had been no door, no opening of any kind, just solid plaster where the hallway abruptly ended. Yet the nurse had vanished as though the wall was nothing more than a mist. A chill ran down Emily's spine, her heart pounding in her chest as the oppressive heat suddenly felt less suffocating and more sinister. Shaken, Emily pressed the call button again, this time with frantic, trembling fingers. She jabbed it repeatedly, the beeping sound cutting through the thick silence of the ward. A few agonizing moments later, Nurse Katie, one of the regulars, arrived with a tired but patient expression. "Is everything all right?" Katie asked, glancing at the monitor beside Emily's bed. Emily's voice wavered as she tried to explain. "There was a nurse. She just walked by my room, but she didn't stop. I tried calling her, but she walked through the wall." Her words came out in a rush, disbelief still clinging to every syllable. Katie froze, her face losing its color for a brief second before she forced a tight, professional smile. "You must have been dreaming," she said, though her voice sounded a touch too casual. "It's the medication. It can cause vivid dreams. You need rest." Emily opened her mouth to protest, but found herself hesitating. There was something in Katie's eyes, a flicker of unease, as if she knew more than she was letting on. Before she could press further, Katie turned and hurriedly left the room, leaving Emily alone once more with the weight of what she'd seen. As the evening wore on, the hospital seemed to sink into an eerie stillness. The usual noises of night, the distant chatter of staff, the soft clatter of equipment seemed muffled, as though the building itself was holding its breath. When Dr. Lewis arrived for his rounds later that evening, Emily hesitated only briefly before bringing up the strange encounter again. "Dr. Lewis," she said carefully, her voice hushed in the quiet room, "I know it sounds crazy, but earlier I saw a nurse. She was dressed differently from the others. Her uniform looked old-fashioned, and she walked through the wall, right at the end of the hall." Dr. Lewis paused, his pen hovering over her chart. He didn't look up immediately, but when he did, there was an odd glint in his eyes. "You're not the first to say something like that," he said softly, glancing over his shoulder as if to check that they were alone. He lowered his voice, leaning slightly closer. "That part of the hospital used to be different. Before they renovated in the late 1940s, there was a doorway there. It led to the old nursing quarters." Emily felt a shiver crawl up her spine, the air in the room suddenly cooler despite the lingering heat. "Do you mean—" she began, her words trailing off. Dr. Lewis nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Some say the ghost of an old nurse from that time still lingers here. There have been sightings before, mostly at night. A woman in a white uniform, always walking the same route. They say she died here, in the hospital, but no one knows for sure." The silence that followed felt heavier than the oppressive summer air. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but it wasn't just from fear. It was the unsettling realization that what she had seen wasn't a hallucination after all. As Dr. Lewis left the room, his footsteps fading down the hallway, Emily lay back against her pillow, her thoughts racing. The soft sound of footsteps echoed faintly in the corridor once more, but this time, Emily didn't dare look. This ghost tale was produced by Rick J.M. Gauthier, the up-and-coming Canadian author of the Little Ricky the Boy, Little Ricky the Lad, and Little Ricky the Young Man collections of short stories. This ghost story is based upon known facts about hauntings in and around Renfrew. Little Ricky short stories can be purchased from Amazon and Kobo. Amazon has paperbacks and ebooks. Kobo has audiobooks. If you buy a short story, all proceeds are donated to a food bank. Books are not expensive. Some are as low as $6. Consider helping Rick get established as an author by supporting him with a purchase and a review. Consider helping Rick to feed the hungry.